Good evening, everyone. Dear friends, today we have a very special guest in Heart Talks with Dr. Chinu, Season 2. And that guest is my own teacher, mentor, Dr. Julie Diamond, all the way from California. Dr. Julie is a renowned psychologist, a researcher, and a person who has developed the construct of power intelligence. She is the founder CEO of Diamond Leadership Consulting Firm, and she is a trainer par excellence. I can easily claim that I am one of the very few Indians trained by her personally into diamond leadership coaching and profiling. So I'm so glad to help you meet Dr. Julie Diamond.
Thank you. Hello, nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
It's morning over there, Julie. So
yes,
I woke you up early in the morning for this session.
Well, I'm an early riser, so it wasn't really hard to do. So it's great to be with you.
Thank you so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure.
Julie, my first question to you is, what is power intelligence? We have heard a lot about other intelligences than the normal, usual intelligence that we talk about. That is emotional intelligence, social intelligence. What is power intelligence?
Well, let me start with a simple explanation. I could say that power intelligence is simply the competencies for using power well. Let's make it very simple. And what do I mean by well? I mean using power in a way that enhances your own talent or that enables your own intelligence, your own talent, your own contributions, and that of others to come forth and to enrich the group or the organization within which you operate.
Okay, so shall I summarize it by saying that, we all have our own inherent talents, and when we become aware of them, bring it to the table, and we align it with others' talents, that dynamics is power intelligence, right?
Well, that's true. And the one piece that adds, I mean, we could say that simply, let's say you could do the same thing with self-confidence or self-awareness. The thing about power intelligence is that power, we have a collective reflex to defer in the face of power or to hold back in the face of power. And that power operates in a way on groups and organizations that can dampen and diminish contributions. Power is kind of scary. So it's learning how to use power in a way that's not scary or that's enabling and encouraging and empowering.
Yes, so we have our own power, and how do we use it in a way that it doesn't intimidate others, rather
Correct.
It encourages ourselves and others to contribute in a more meaningful way. Is
Correct.
that how we should put it?
I like that. I would go with that definition. Absolutely.
Okay, so Julie, how did you come up with this construct of power intelligence? What led you to this?
Well, I was always interested in power, actually. Even as a small child, I grew up in a very political family. My father was a journalist and political activist, and I grew up in an era of civil rights protests and anti-war protests, and I was just always aware of social class distinctions and racial distinctions and hierarchies and ways that power was used, mostly politically. And then I was very politically oriented. I was thinking a lot about power from a political point of view. But then when I became politically active as a social activist, I was a little dismayed by power dynamics between people. And so then I became interested in psychology. I thought, well, there's an intra-psychic or intrapersonal dimension to power and an interpersonal dimension to power. It's not just systemic or political. And that was very fascinating to me. So then I studied power dynamics and group interaction and power dynamics in language use. And so I was always circling this topic area. And I think, even as I started to work with groups and organizations, I always saw that power was at play. Power was always a dynamic present. And it just kind of consolidated for me. I just felt like we need to I thought it's not, it must be learnable. I think that was my big insight. I thought it's very complicated, and people tend to be very overwhelmed by the topic because it's such a big topic. It's so historical. It's everywhere. Somebody once said that power is to the social sciences what energy is to the physical sciences. It's so foundational. But then I thought, well, we can make it simple. There must be competencies. It just must be learnable. And so I think that's where I began to consolidate or to put together a construct of power intelligence. What are the basic competencies? How can we learn it? What do we need to know in order to use power well? And that was about 15 years ago, and that's where I am today. So that's how it started.
Yes, a lot of work in this area and pioneering work. And I like the way you say that, we all have power and power is always at play, but we become overwhelmed by it and we really want to know how to use it. And since it is learnable, it is something that we can learn, that gives it an edge.
Right.
And maybe, I would like to discuss a scenario with you where India also we have lots of hierarchies, whether it is politically, we also have a caste system, we also have systems in the family where there is patriarchy, where there are, rules and the head of the family and all these things. And there are people who feel subdued. There are people who feel that, they are not being able to come up and they are not being able to realize their potential because they are being put down. And something that we all experience in our own lives in India, whether it is in our own houses, whether it is our parents or authority figures in our childhood, whether it is, when we start working, and we are always in awe of powerful people. And we do not know how to handle authority. We don't know how to, have a kind of a relationship which is mutually more fruitful or useful or meaningful or more purposeful. And so it is such a good thing to see that, there is something which can help us to learn this.
It's true. There are hierarchical systems across the globe, and there's systems of oppression that hold people back and hold people down, and that's a fact. I wish it weren't so, and people are working to overturn that in some ways where it's not helpful and it's unhealthy and it's oppressive. I think what sustains me and what I think led me to this study was the realization that if you look throughout history, if you look throughout all of human history, every social advance was championed by people without power. No government sat down one day and said, gosh, I think I just realized women or African Americans or lower caste people, gosh, they don't have rights. We should do something about that. Said no government ever. And so every major social advance, every major human rights advance, civil rights advance started by people without the authority, without positional power, without the social status. So they're using some kind of power. And that's key to power intelligence, is the fact that there's multiple kinds of power. And in English, power is a singular noun. There's no plural, but I always think it should be plural. It should be powers, because what was the power that people used to overturn laws that were unjust? What were the powers that people used to champion civil rights or women's rights? So environmental, right now we're in an environmental crisis. What are the powers people are using to fight the pandemic, right? We're looking at expertise power. We're looking at personal power. We're looking at the power of persuasion, of relationship. Informal powers in organizations. So these are always at play. And when we forget them, we're more likely to feel that we can't contribute at all, because we're only looking at one kind of power, and that's positional power or social status power. But that's limiting, and that's one of the ways that we also hold ourselves back, by not acknowledging all the other types of powers we have.
Exactly. And as you say that, a few examples come to my mind from India. There is a forest man in India who was alone on the beach side, and he saw uh, lots of snakes dying at that beach. And he did not have any education, he did not have any money. He just had this wisdom that if I can, and that beach was a barren land, and he thought that if I could plant some trees over there, maybe we could be able to save these animals, and something positive will happen. And he just started by planting 5 plants, and he created a large forest in 18,000 hectares alone, just by keeping on collecting those seeds and planting them again and again and again. And he's all over the YouTube, and
I've seen that story. I've actually seen that. It's a great example.
Yeah, that's a great example. He did not look for any positional power at all. He did not go asking for help to any government or any other person. He just did whatever he wanted to do on his own.
Yeah, one of the things I always say when I coach people is I say, what's your, we all have a sphere of influence, which is a common expression. We all have a sphere of influence. What's your sphere of influence? What can you affect? What can you do? What special talent or power do you have? And a great example, his sphere of influence was he could plant a tree. And so he didn't wait for permission. He didn't, he just went ahead and did that. It's an excellent example.
Yes, and there is one more person who thought that his village was cut from the other areas where he wanted to visit, and if he could just have a path through the mountain, maybe it will be easier for them to travel. And he himself created that path. He used to start working every day, and he did not ask for people to come and help him or nothing. He just started doing it, and he did it.
Yeah. So
taking a path out of the mountain alone.
Right. Which is a metaphor. It's a metaphor. It's great that we can all cut a path. That's right.
He did it. And we have a movie made on him now.
It's a great example. And it's a perfect metaphor that we all, like, somewhere we have some power to do something, to cut a path to where we want to go, to make some steps towards our goals, or in a way to achieve our aims.
Yes. And so, Julie, my favorite part of the leadership training that you gave us through Diamond Leadership Coaching, and the power intelligence training that I have undergone under you, is personal power. And I would like to, keep on talking to you about it, unless we have a few people have joined us already, and I'm looking forward for a few comments and questions from them as well. But I want you to help us understand, what is the difference between personal power and positional power?
So there's a key difference. And the key difference between personal power and positional power is that positional power resides in the role, but personal power resides in you. So when you have a position of power in an organization, you leave that organization, you leave your position behind. So your power comes from the office that you occupy, or that role that you occupy.
The chair that you're sitting on.
The chair that you're sitting in, exactly. And now you used certain innate powers to get there. Maybe your education or your intelligence or your experience got you there, but the power of your position is really in the chair. It's not in you. Personal power is innate. It's in you. It can't be taken from you. You can only lose access to it, right? So we all have implicit personal powers. So just the force of our personality, our different personality traits and characteristics can become personal powers. We have to work on them and develop them. Our life experience, our wisdom, what we've been through, the lessons we've learned that make us wise and allow us to make good decisions or to understand complex challenges, that's a personal power. Our ability to get along with others, our sense of purpose and meaning in life that sustains us, that gives us the resilience and the ability to overcome challenge, that's personal power. So all of this is within us, and it's up to us to develop it, to turn these kind of raw materials into personal power. And it's something we can continually work on in life.
Yes.
Our ability to manage emotions, self-regulation, is key to developing personal power, that we can control our emotions, that we're not just triggered or reactive to events and challenges, but that we can think clearly and that we can respond effectively and stay centered or refine our center if we're troubled or upset. That's all personal power.
Exactly. So. And personal power is something that psychology, psychotherapy is aimed at.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. So, psychology is the study of developing personal power.
Personal power.
Right. That's right.
And also a couple of things that you mentioned, I would like to repeat them. Intra-psychic powers and interpersonal powers.
Yes.
Power dynamics, so intra-psychic is something that we can control, that we can access, that we can, and as you said very beautifully, that we all have implicit personal power. The only risk that we have is of losing access to it.
Right.
And we do lose access, and that's why we get clients in our offices.
That's right. That's right. And that's why also, and this is a key point, that's also why people misuse power, is because they lose access. They don't feel in touch with power. They get triggered or reactive or whatever over a long period of time or just in a moment, and they lose access to their sense of power. So yeah, we can control that. We can work on that. That's the ongoing work of power intelligence, is to see, where have I lost access to that power? How can I regain access to it? So it's a big component of the work.
We are going to talk about it a little after a little while.
Okay.
That how can we develop this personal power? But before that, I want to ask you that we all kind of sabotage our own power.
Right.
And how do we do it, and why do we do it, is a question in our minds.
How do we do it? Why do we do it? It's a big question. So one of the things is that, and I write about this in my book, is that the experience of low rank. So for example, if somebody puts you down or criticizes you, from an evolutionary perspective, being in a low rank position is life-threatening. If you're the lowest, if in a tribe, if you have low rank, you could be left behind, you could be not fed, you could be hurt, you could be injured. So just in our DNA, evolutionarily, the experience of low rank is a very it's more salient, it's a more emotional experience. So in my book, I say it's limbic, that low rank is limbic. It's going to produce an emotional reaction that's going to overwhelm us and take precedent over anything else that happens. So we could even be a teacher, or we could even be in a high rank position, a parent in a family that somebody speaks back to or criticizes. And if that person gets angry or hurt or offended, they drop their sense of power, not their role, but their inner sense of power. And they go into what's called, like I say, like a low rank inner state. And they've lost access to their power. So, and it happens in an instant. We know this when we know psychology. We know what happens when we get emotional and we lose our sort of best thinking. And in that moment, what we do is we use our power in a way that's protective or defensive. So that's why I say it's a misuse of power. That if you're in a high rank position and you drop into an internal low rank state, you're at risk of using power in a way that's self-serving to protect or defend. And that is a misuse of power. So.
Great. And let me summarize and explain it
Okay.
to the audience once again. And so let us say that, we have this rank for ourselves, and let us call this rank as our own self-worth. Let us say that if I have, 20 people similar to me, 20 psychologists working in the field, and I rank myself as 10. And that is the rank that I give myself. And that is my internal assessment of my own self-worth. And if someone starts criticizing me,
Right.
and it affects me, what I
Right.
do, I drop my rank from 10 to 8
Right. Right.
internally.
Right.
And then I feel that I'm not good enough.
Correct.
I have some self-doubt about my own worth as a psychologist. And then what I do, I start looking from approval from others so that I can regain my rank again.
Great example. So looking for approval is a vicious cycle, right? The more you need other people to make you feel powerful, the more your sense of power is sourced in something external to yourself, the more dependent you are, and the more, I call that, it's a very frail or unstable position, because your locus of control is outside of yourself. So you're constantly needing to be validated or approved of, and then your behaviors follow that. So the key is to constantly be looking at developing, stabilizing, cultivating your own personal powers and self-esteem. This is a very important part of using power well.
Yes, yes. And so I think the first step is knowing about our own power, becoming aware that we have an inherent worth.
That's step one.
Approved of it or not.
That's right. That's step one. I mean, step one is really thinking powers. I come back to that idea that I may not be the teacher, I may not be the boss, I may not be the parent in this family, but I have other powers. What are they? Where do I have rank? Where do I shine? What are the different qualities inside of me that help me, that I can use, that are enabling, that allow me to be impactful and successful, right? It could be intelligence, it could be a wisdom, it could be a calm, it could be an assertiveness, right? So we have to constantly, and one of the exercises I have people do in the training is to do what I call a power audit. So we take a power audit, right? We sort of like, what are the different powers I have? Am I aware of them? Am I using them? Am I not using them? Sometimes we're afraid. Sometimes we have bad opinions about some powers. We think we feel I shouldn't be smart, or I shouldn't use this power, or we neglect certain powers that we have. We don't think they're valuable. So it's just that power audit is the first step. What do I have? What am I using? What enables me to succeed in what I do in the world?
Yes, and when you say that, I have a very common example of how we have a bad opinion about a power. We have learned in our childhood that talking about our own self is not good. That is boasting or bragging. And so there are people who have a lot to say about themselves, but they just don't say. And that doesn't work in an interview. That doesn't work.
That's
in
a great example. That's a great example. And a negotiation, there's that's right. That's right. We lose out. There's a pay gap, in the United, everywhere globally, but there's a gender pay gap. And what they've discovered is that, women are less likely to speak about themselves and to communicate their worth and to be more assertive because of gender socialization. So that's a great example where we don't name our, exactly.
Yes. And so now Ishrat from Hyderabad. She's one of my students, and she's not a psychologist. She's a computer engineer, but she's very interested in psychology. So she asked this question: how can we awaken our hidden power?
It's a great question. Thank you for the question, Ishrath. So we spoke about this power audit. I would say, I think the first way to awaken hidden power is to literally think to yourself, what are my different powers? And one thing you can do is to look at all the different kinds of power we have. We have personal power, and personal power alone has all these different, what are the different traits and characteristics that I have that make me successful, that make me, get friends, that make open doors for me. What about my intelligence, my expertise? What about my life experience? So lots of things within that. What about my informal power is a hugely important power. Am I connected to people? Can I make friends easily? Do I have networks that can help me, that can open doors for me or offer me opportunities? All of these things. What about my education, my caste? Where do I have different powers? And even if I don't have high rank somewhere, let's say I have low rank in some ways, we can ask ourselves, well, what has that taught me? What have I gained from that? What have I learned from that difficult experience? What has that given me? So I have a really good example. I have a friend who grew up very, very poor. And when he was growing up, his parents didn't have rent money. From month to month, they couldn't quite pay the rent. And they were always late, and they were always scraping it together. And so he told me that at the end of every month when rent was due, his parents would send him to talk to the landlord because he was a little boy, and they felt that they weren't gonna, they were gonna be more understanding and everything. So he learned, and he told me this story. He said, I learned how to speak to anybody. I wasn't afraid. I learned how to ask for things. I learned how to have a lot more social courage. I became much more social bold. And it's really true. This is somebody who I always admired for their ability to just walk into any situation and speak up. And so that's a great example that for him was something that he uncovered in a low rank experience. So power, this is a key thing. Hidden power can come from a low rank, not just a high rank experience, right? So it's not just the powers we have, it's what about powers we don't have? What about low rank experiences we have? What has that taught us? What has that given us? So
yes. And I also have an example for this. You have already met Shailesh, my son. And he has always been an average student in academics, but he has been good in music. So whenever there used to be a quiz or a test in the class, he would follow it up by singing a song. And so he would feel that, there are things which I can't do well, but this is something which I can do well than most of the people in my class. And that's how he used to manage and balance his own sense of self-worth right from his childhood.
That's a great example. That's a really great example too. And what he's doing there is he's balancing, like you said, I love that he's balancing himself, and he's not overestimating high rank. That's another trap we have to answer the question, how do we uncover hidden powers, is to watch our tendency to overestimate high rank. It's kind of I use the analogy in my teaching of being on a ladder, which is a common metaphor for power. And when you're on a ladder, naturally, you're always looking up. So that's a good, we're always looking up. We're always aware of the power above us, and we always forget the power we have. And so we overvalue high rank in others, and we overvalue the power we don't have. And I think that's something we need to really watch out for, that, people in high positional power also suffer. They also have trouble. It's not, they're not better people, right? Something got them there, but they're not better people. They're just having a higher position, and we shouldn't overestimate that. They can also make mistakes.
Yes. Can we call that assumed power, Julie? I have experienced it in a couple of government organizations. They were assuming powers that the law did not give them. So, for example, if there is an organization which has been constituted to give grants to some institutes,
Yes.
this financial grants to some people, these organizations actually started ranking them for their for their what kind of a building or infrastructure they have, what kind of staff they have, what kind. They were not supposed to do that,
Yeah.
but they got more power. They assumed powers which they did not have, and they started harassing people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so we haven't talked about that yet, which is we're talking a lot in this interview so far about lower, not having power, growing power, having power. What happens when you do have power and you overuse it or you lose touch with the limits of your power? And that's one of the dangers. That's the flip side of power intelligence is what happens. Why do people misuse it when they have positions of power? And one of the reasons is because lower oversight, they become what I say sometimes, they're cut off from feedback. They're cut off from, getting any kind of reflection about themselves that challenges their high rank status. That's a really big danger.
Yes, and this is a very, very pertinent point, Julie, that leaders who keep themselves high rank in the high rank always, they really don't like any feedbacks. And I can give you one of my own personal examples. So there was, when I used to be really busy and I had a team of 42 people working with me. And, I used to have quick meetings. So let us say, come on, we'll have a 10 minutes meeting in the conference hall. They used to all assemble. And I used to just tell them that this needs to be done. This was not done well. Please correct this and all that. And the meeting would go off and they would go off to their desks. One day, a girl, she remained in the conference hall and she said that, ma'am, can I have a word with you? I just want to have a minute of yours. So I said, yes, please tell me. And she was an intern. She had just graduated and joined us. She said, ma'am, I have been here for a month now, but I want to bring your attention to the fact that in this 10-minute meeting every day, nothing positive is said. You forget to appreciate.
Wow. Wow.
And I was taken aback. This little girl, out of all the 42 people, has the courage to give this feedback. And I was so grateful to her.
That's fantastic.
And I said, you thought that I would take this feedback, and it is such a valuable feedback. From tomorrow onwards, I'm going to start saying something good before I start putting out what is to be done.
That's a great story. Yeah. So,
and so if leaders are not open to feedback, they will forget to listen to what others think about them. And that's about that's the use of the power intelligence profiling that we do, Julie.
That's right. That is exactly right. That's why I developed a 360 assessment for leaders to see what is the impact that they have on the organization, on their teams, on the performance of the people around them, because it's very hard to give feedback. It's very hard to take feedback. The culture also, oftentimes, power is scary. You don't want to speak up. And some leaders actively discourage feedback. I think more and more it's being recognized how important feedback is. I think emotional intelligence has gone a long way to kind of get leaders to understand, really, I need to open up. I need to be more self-aware and grow. And that's helped a lot, but there's still too many leaders who refuse feedback or make it just too difficult to give feedback. And that's really problematic. Yeah.
Yes. And Julie, we have some very interesting questions from our audience. So we will take a couple of them before we go ahead. And this is from Dr. Pratibha Agrawal. She is a dentist, but now she is interested in psychology and pursuing her post-graduation in psychology. And she asks us, how can we transform our weaknesses into our powers?
Love that question. Thank you so much. So let's think about what we mean by weakness, right? So what's a weakness really? Like that's a interesting question, and I would love to discuss that first, because sometimes what we call a weakness is simply an unloved trait. So for example, we all grow up in a culture that teaches us that some parts of ourselves should not be brought in, right? Or that are better than others. We grow up in an extroverted family, so we feel our introversion is problematic, or we grow up in a really brainy family and we're more artistic or creative and we feel that's not good. So we first have to think about, what am I calling a weakness? So we've underdeveloped certain things, right? We've underdeveloped certain things out of that kind of acculturation from childhood.
Yes, the things which are not conforming to the family.
Society, exactly, or society. That's right.
Society.
That's exactly right. And it could be oftentimes it parallels or overlaps with social, discrimination. Women shouldn't be like this, or people of color shouldn't be like this. And so, I think that's the first thing, is we have to really think, is this a weakness? Or is it something that I'm not valuing in myself? Or is it something that I didn't value in myself, therefore I didn't develop it? So for example, I'm kind of conflict avoidant by nature, which is funny because I'm opinionated and I speak out a lot. But when it comes to conflict, I would rather not have to have a direct conflict. So that's a weakness. But it's also, one way to develop a weakness into a strength is to look at, well, what's the flip side of that? So the flip side of that is that I'm friendly, I'm personable, I like people, I like peace, I like to keep the peace. Yes, that can become problematic, but there's also a strength implied. So, but I'm not going to beat myself up for my weaknesses. And I think that's the other thing, is to really, I don't think there's anything wrong with having weaknesses. Nobody can develop everything evenly, right? It's just impossible. We have to focus on a few key things and develop them into mastery, and everything else we're going to have weaknesses. So the other piece of developing a weakness into a strength is to simply be like, yeah, I didn't get to that. I'll get to that in my next lifetime. Or, it's on my list. I'll get there. And not to feel bad about it. So those are some ways. That's how I think about it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see you talk about other lifetime, because in the Bhagavad Gita, we say that, you have so many lifetimes. You can come again and rectify whatever you wanted to rectify about yourself.
We have to. It's the most sense-making theory, because there's only so much you can do in a lifetime. So you really do have to pick and choose what this lifetime is about. Yeah.
Yes. And so let me repeat what you said about weaknesses for our audience. That, a weakness can simply be a trait or a characteristic which we have not liked about ourselves, or others have not liked, or it is not gelling with the general idea of things in our family or in the society or in the culture. And so we have to look at, how did it remain underdeveloped, and what is the flip side of it, and how can we actually engage in it more so that it becomes more, dominant in ourselves, and maybe we can bring it out. So that was a fantastic answer that you gave, Julie. And
there's also acceptance. Just want to say one thing, and acceptance. Just say, yeah, I'm not. That's, yep. Not that good there.
Acceptance is the ground from where we start.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And so we have one more question from Shrabani Chaudhary. And I don't think I know her personally. Her question is, how to upgrade emotional power.
How to upgrade emotional power. So I'm not sure I fully understand what she means by that. So I'm going to give it my best shot. A little bit is what I
means Probably she means that, when we, probably she means emotional resilience, how to develop that. And the self-regulation part that you were just talking about a while ago, that, some of us are emotionally more sensitive, more prone to get triggered, more reactive to external circumstances and situations. So maybe that is what she wants to ask.
Yeah, that's a great question in that case, because that is a really key thing, is how to grow our emotional resilience. And I think that, one of the key things I talked about, getting triggered and dropping into a low rank state. So working on triggers is a key component of power intelligence. If you're coaching leaders or you're working with people on becoming more powerful, a big part of what you're going to have to do is work with them on their own responsiveness and not getting reactive, learning about what triggers me. I mean, I think there's a lot of work outside of power intelligence with mindfulness and emotional regulation and emotional intelligence that teaches you, how do I develop more stability? How do I become less reactive? I think understanding, I always talk about, anticipating and preparing is a big part of it. So, it's like the power audit and the similar thing. You can do like a trigger audit. You can ask yourself, what are the things that trigger me? What are the things that upset me? Where do I kind of lose it? Where do I, and why? What happens to me? And just that sort of slow uncovering of yourself, using self-awareness to become aware of it, I think really helps a lot. Learning how to manage yourself emotionally, and there's such great tools out there about that, really help. And I think, we certainly don't own the market on that. I think that psychology, there's just such wonderful tools now for working with triggers and emotionality and growing that resilience. Very much helps.
I'll just help her understand this. If I can share the screen and write on it, I'll just check. No, I can't. That is not enabled. So I'll just give her a visual representation. So let us say that, we are on a rank of 100 and we have estimated our personal power to be 100. So there is a pitfall. This is a tricky thing when you overestimate yourself and you say that I'm 300, whereas you are 100. So that is what Julie just talked about when she said that, when we walk up the ladder, we are seeing upwards and we start giving us a rank which is not ours. So that is one side of it. The other side of it is going down immediately. So if someone says that, you are not good looking enough, or I don't like you, or you can't speak, taking that 100 to 0 immediately. How can we keep this 100 as stable? Is by becoming aware of our own power first. So if we are really sure that, these are my strengths and these are my characteristics and these are my traits, then even if someone says something, I'm not going to lose them at a drop of a hat. I'm going to keep them with me and I'm going to say that, okay, this is a stable line for me. And maybe that is what Julie wanted to say when she said that, stability. The stability that we can attain is through using other tools like for self-regulation, like mindfulness and all other things that she just mentioned.
One thing I just want to, when you just explain that, one thing I want to talk about that is what's really important is to establish your inner benchmarks, that we lose, that the more other people's opinions or the more other people's thoughts about us or evaluation of us gets in, the less stable we are, the more emotionally unstable we become. So I think it's really important to
talked about a while ago when you said that, there's a danger when you always seek approvals and validations from other people. You're dependent on other people to give you the thanks.
That's right. So one part of maturity is to develop your inner benchmarks. Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up here? What would make me happy with myself?
Yes. So. Yes. And now, Julie, we have another very interesting question from Roli. Roli is from Mumbai in central India. And she's ICC certified coach herself, and she has done a few programs with our organization Feeling Minds as well. She wants to know, how can power be perceived as positive leadership sign than negative one?
It's right. It's a little struggling with the question again. Just
So I'll explain it.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
I'll try
Yeah.
to explain it. Yeah. So she wants to ask, is power always bad?
Right.
Is
That's
power
what I thought. Yeah.
always negative?
No.
Or are
Yeah.
there some positive sides to power, especially
Absolutely.
in leadership?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I talk about is like there's certain sort of everyone brings a mental map to power. You hear the word power, and it's not the first time you've heard it. It's not the first time you've experienced it. So we all have these different mental models of power. And a common one is that power is a bad word. And I'm very clear about this. Power is neither good nor bad. It's neutral. It depends on how you use it, and it depends on why you use it. So the how is, do you use it in a way that's enabling, empowering, that's amplifying goodness, that's amplifying talent, that's amplifying engagement, or using it in a way that shuts people down, right? That makes people afraid. And the why is, are you using it just for your own self-aggrandizement? Are you using it only for your own self-interest, or using it for the benefit of the whole? And I can think of many, many, many great leaders who use their power in an effective, enabling, empowering way, who make decisions, they deploy resources, they make decisions effectively, they engage people. And so I absolutely don't think power is negative, or that, if you have positional power, it's necessarily
Negative or positive in itself?
No, not at all. In and itself, not at all. Not at all. It's the how and it's the why.
How and why we are using it. And another question is from Chandana. She's our associate in Guwahati, that is the northeastern part of India, and she's a brilliant psychologist herself. She wants to ask, what is informal
power? So informal power is really interesting. Informal power is the power of a given group or organization it's not written down, it's not formalized. You can't find it in a chart or anything. So for example, when you go into a group of friends or a group of colleagues, the informal power structure is who gets listened to more than others, who is more of an insider, or who's more popular, or whose opinions will be followed. And that has to do with all these sort of kind of invisible norms, things like, seniority, or who's been there the longest, or whose behavior conforms most to that particular organization, who knows whom. So in an organization, for example, somebody who has access to information might have more informal power. Somebody who's been there long, somebody who knows people really well. They may have a low rank, a low position, but they're really informed. They have high positional power, high informal power, sorry. And the thing about informal power is that it can even be more powerful than positional power. So sometimes in an organization, somebody just, they've been there the longest, they know how things get done. And even somebody who comes into the organization with high rank has to defer to them because they don't have the answers, or they don't have the information. So it's something we forget, and it's something that's and it's also something we can abuse. This is a very interesting thing. Exactly. Right? We can abuse our informal power if we're popular, we're an insider. This is where cliques happen. This is where exclusion happens, insider-outsider dynamics happen. And I think, organizations now are really, very much focused on inclusion and diversity. And I think that we can't underestimate the role that informal power plays in making inclusive workplaces. It's not just leadership, and it's not just policies. It's how people welcome and engage with people who are new or have less sort of insider status. So, yeah.
So for example, the personal assistant of the CEO,
has a lot of informal power. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. The person who can fix the computers has a lot of informal power. Yeah.
And sometimes even the drivers of great lead.
Absolutely. Absolutely have a lot of informal power. That's exactly right.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
Yes. And so now, Julie, we are into the last 10 minutes of our conversation together. And we have had a lot of engagement from our audience today. And there is someone who is putting very good, complex reflections also. One thing that I wanted to ask, I'm just looking at if there is any question that has remained unanswered. I think there was one question which I have missed.
I really like this formulation. Sanjay Singh writes, having mastery goal instead of performance goals makes you full of
Yes,
internal
these
validation.
are
Love that.
complex reflections that he's
Yeah.
providing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yes.
Fabulous.
So I wanted to ask that, with all the power thing is being perceived, and especially the leadership coaching arena, we feel that it is the organizations or the CEOs or the directors or maybe the heads of the departments, they are perceived to be leaders and they are given leadership coaching. Whereas we have to lead in so many of our other roles as well. So if
Absolutely.
you are leading a class, you are a leader. If you are leading a
Absolutely.
house, you are a leader. Being a house lady or a homemaker is also a leader. And there
Absolutely.
are many things that we can learn through leadership coaching in our own basic roles as a leader. What do you
Absolutely.
have to say about that?
I agree 100%. I think that, think about it this way. Everybody in an organization, even in a company or organization, people's immediate experience of their organization is their immediate supervisor. And that starts very low down. So the lowest level supervisors or teachers, parents, politicians. I mean, there's a lot of places we're always using power. Everybody has some kind of power. And I think that it's absolutely leadership coaching should be for everybody. I don't think that it should be limited to the most senior levels. In fact, I think that the more early we learn about being a leader, the better. I think, wherever we're going to have power over somebody or over people, I think we need to learn about power, and it's not just limited to the highest levels of leadership. Absolutely agree.
Yes, and as you mentioned that, as a parent also we are leading, so we need to know a lot of how we can, make our children themselves prone to sabotage their personal power by how we react to them.
Absolutely. 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 I think parents should go through a power course. A parent. Yeah, absolutely.
And one more thing that power intelligence or power dynamics or power leadership can be useful is in relationships, and that's what we discussed at length when we had met during the course. And in relationship also we are leading an emotion.
Yes. Well, there's power in relationships that when we talk about different kinds of power, emotional power, then we really see it at play in relationship, because we don't have positions so much as we have emotional power, we have expert power, and then there's gender roles that also conspire in relationships. So there's a lot of power dynamics in intimate relationships that deeply affect the quality of life that we have. And I think, looking at power dynamics in relationship is very, very important. So.
Yes, and that's what I attended your course for, and because we are developing a relationship course, and it is going to be the one of its kind course to be offered in India right now, and I'm going to use the power intelligence module to help people realize that where they go wrong in the power dynamics. And one more question comes to my mind is when you talk about gender roles. Uh, Two questions actually. I missed the earlier cue, and I'll ask you after this one. So when you talk about gender roles all over the world, it is universal that there are certain roles ascribed to a particular gender and certain other roles ascribed to the other gender. And when we see the role reversal, when we see that some kinds of traits are being explicitly expressed by another gender, which were not supposed to be experienced in that way, how does it affect the relationship?
So I think personally, healthy human development is a key to healthy human development is flexibility, or right. So I can be different with different people, or I can be, I'm not always in the same mood, or I'm not always in the same, mode. I can, as the context changes, I can be different. So I think, and I think the same thing with role assignment in relationship. I think that a sign of health is when people can be flexible, and they can understand why, because then you can understand the other's perspective. You yourself become more of a whole person and not just a narrow enactment of certain behaviors, but you have access to other behaviors. When men can also become more of a caregiver, when women can be more assertive in public, or more of the breadwinner. I think these are healthy things, because it means we're becoming more whole. We have access to more behaviors, and it means that in relationship we can support each other better. We can pick up what needs to be picked up. It should be more situational and not just so fixed.
Exactly. And so
that's how I see it.
Flexibility is the key. If the situation demands for you to be a breadwinner, there's nothing wrong in it. And if the situation demands you to be more of a caregiver, being a man, there's nothing wrong in it.
The situation or the disposition. Maybe you're more inclined to, maybe you feel, maybe you're just more inclined to be the caregiver. You're more inclined to be the breadwinner. That's also,
you love that more.
Yeah, that should be, healthy human development should be that we discover what's inside of us and live it as fully as possible. So
yeah. And so now let us end with one interesting question that I missed asking you earlier. When you talk about political leaders, how receptive are political leaders in your country to undergo leadership coaching? Because in our country, political leaders, I don't think they're going to attend any leadership workshop very soon.
So I want to make a really big distinction here, because I've worked with people in government a lot, and I want to make a distinction between elected officials and career public servants. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of people who work in government as a lifelong career. We call them public servants or bureaucrats. And I have just some of the most committed, dedicated, altruistic, fabulous leaders I've met in government. And so they're very open, they're very receptive, they want to do good things, they're in government because they care. An elected official is a very different thing. An elected official is somebody who is beholden to constituents. They're not appointed. It's not a lifelong role, right? It can become one. And I think that one of the problems with politics is, I do think it's a problematic profession, because I think that there's lots of reasons people do that. Sometimes they're called to public service, which is a great thing. And sometimes they see an opportunity for themselves. Sometimes they're in office too long and they lose touch with their constituents. There's a lot of money, there's a lot of power. I think that so I think that where people are, have lost touch with the purpose, or they have their own self-interest in mind, they're not open to coaching. I agree. I think politics needs a little bit of a reset there, but so
yes. And so we have a lot of scope as leadership coaches, because there are many clients that we see are in the making, and we can offer them leadership coaching.
That's right. I just want to be careful not to paint politicians all with one brush. There are people who are genuinely drawn out of the goodness of their heart to help others.
We cannot overgeneralize. And
right. I'm careful about that. So
and Julie, it has been a fantastic conversation and session with you, and we all have enjoyed this interaction. very much, and we look forward to having you in the next season of Heart Talks as well. I
Thank
hope
you.
that you have enjoyed as well, and I have a few comments to share with you who are already.
Perfect fallible beings. Yeah.
So because these comments, they will evaporate once I close the session, then we won't be able to see them.
It's been great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity very much. I'm glad it was helpful.
Thank you so much. Look forward
Thank
to
you.
having you in another season, and maybe with because this was an orientation session on power intelligence for these budding psychologists, and I hope that they have learned a lot through this one, and maybe we can have a advanced topic next time.
It's great. I look forward to it. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much. Thank you so much.
Have a great night. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.